Joining me now, Steve Double, Conservative MP for St Austell and Newquay, one of those who signed that no-confidence motion. Steve, good afternoon to you. Let's just start with the last comments there of Lindsay Hoyle. It was all about safety. He doesn't want to, pick up the phone and hear that one of your colleagues has been murdered by terrorists. Are you buying that?
Well, I'm sure that was part of his reason for making the decision he did, and I acknowledge that. But in my view, unfortunately, I think he's actually made things worse, because what he's done is he's given a message out in Parliament that if you threaten your MP with abuse or the threat of violence, that actually you can influence how Parliament is run, and that's a terrible message to send out. That's not good for our democracy. That's not good for our country, and so. Although he may think he did something for the very best of reasons, and as I said, I acknowledge that's probably what he thought, he's actually, in my view, made things worse, not helped.
So you think he should go?
I find it very difficult to see how he can recover the trust and respect that he needs to have to function in the office of Speaker. The role of Speaker is so central to the way that the House of Commons functions, and it's vital that the holder of that office commands the respect and trust of the House. And I think the events of yesterday really have brought into question his ability to do the job. He clearly gave into pressure from the Leader of the Opposition to make the decision he did against the advice of the clerks of the House. And I find it very difficult to see how he can recover from that.
Had you ever had concerns about Lindsay Hoyle before, Steve?
Well, I have to say, I spent 2 years in the government whip's office, and in the whip's office, you do work very closely with the Speaker. And largely, I got on with him very well. I found him to be very, good-natured, that we had a good working relationship, and he dealt with people generally fairly and properly. There have been times when he's done things that I thought, oh, I'm not too sure about that. Perhaps that's sort of happening a bit more frequently in recent months. But I think the decision yesterday was so serious and such a breach of the trust that the Speaker has to hold of the House that, as I said, I think it's a serious matter that he is really going to struggle to recover from.
As it stands, from what we can gather, Steve, there are, along with yourself, there are 63 of your parliamentary colleagues that have signed this motion. Do you expect that figure to rise?
I think so. I mean, that's sort of the general feel, is that this is growing. I'm not sure. I'm back in the constituency in Cornwall, but I watched business questions on the TV as they happened this morning, and I'm not sure actually what happened there helped. I think Labour sort of almost appearing to own the Speaker as one of their own really doesn't help his case. I think that's actually made things worse. So I suspect that number may well grow.
I mean, aside from the party issues and Lindsay Hoyle's political career, etc., you can't have been proud of what Westminster looked like yesterday, bearing in mind the backdrop of what was being discussed. This was a high-octane version of ferrets in a sack. It was undignified. It was not a good look for Parliament.
It was terrible. I mean, I was in Parliament during the 2018-29 period, and John Bercow and Brexit and all that went on then, and that was bad enough. But I actually think what went on yesterday was worse than anything we saw during those times. It was very, very serious. And let's be clear, what this was all actually about was saving Keir Starmer the embarrassment of having a large number of his MPs rebel against his party's line and vote for the SNP motion. That was what this was all about. The reason that Lindsay was persuaded to bring the Labour amendment before the main motion from the SNP, which broke all the convention on how opposition days are handled, was all about avoiding Labour from having to vote on the SNP's motion. And that, when we are dealing with one of the most serious situations in the world today, with what is going on in Gaza and the terrible scenes that we're seeing from there on a daily basis, it was absolutely disgusting, in my view, that the Leader of the Opposition tried to play party politics and save his own skin at the expense of being able to have a proper debate and vote on this very important issue.
Well, we'll watch with interest how this unfolds in the coming hours and the coming days. Steve, thank you for your time. Conservative MP Steve Double with us here on TalkTV. Alicia Fitzgerald, our political correspondent, is also with us. We were on TV together last night, Alicia, when this broke. It was almost like you were in Kabul at one point. You know, I was expecting to see you in a hard hat and one of those bulletproof vests with press written on the front. But you were actually in central lobby in the mother of all parliaments. I mean, extraordinary scene.
It really was, and it was just, I think the fact that that is a day that effectively started off where for the first time the three main parties in Parliament pretty much agreed on something, and that was that in various different forms there should be some kind of ceasefire in Gaza, and that is the first time we've actually really heard that. Yes, the government calling for a humanitarian pause, still a type of ceasefire, the SNP calling for a ceasefire, and the Labour Party now calling for a ceasefire. So in theory, that was quite a big moment, really,
yes,
and a big moment of unity, a day that should have been a big moment of unity. But it turned out to be one of the most fractious days that we've seen in British politics in quite a long time, to be honest. It was really extraordinary.